This is a change. We've got this new high-tech transparent podium. It's it's the future. Hi. Thank you for being here despite the weird green, gray, ominous weather and heavy rain. I appreciate that you came out tonight. I'm Dorothy Kaczynski. I'm the Vredenberg Director and CEO of the Phillips, and I'm really pleased that we're having this great program with these great people. So, a little bit of context. So we're focusing on our site-specific Centennial art commissions. And the artists who have or will soon execute those: Victor Ekpuk, Nekisha Durrett, and Wesley Clark. So Centennial, COVID sort of distorted many things, and it seems to keep on giving. So our 100th anniversary year was 2021, but I don't know. I think we have to call it quits maybe at the end of this year. Otherwise, we'll lose credibility. You can only stretch so far. But we had to postpone so many things. There were fantastic celebratory shows that, so few people saw. But we were determined to maintain a sense of commemoration, celebration, outreach, expansion, just sort of a holding true to the promises that we have made to ourselves, to our community. And part of that was to reach deep and with authenticity into our artistic community, which is so lively and vital. And that brought our decision to gather our funds and to have these site-specific commissions. I think probably Wesley Clark, our Director of Contemporary Art Initiatives, or Nehemiah Dixon III, our Director of Community Engagement, who executed the selection process, the jury process. They'll explain all of that, and they'll give you the full biographies of our distinguished artists. But our idea about our Centennial was not to look inward and to pat ourselves on the back, but to look into our community and to demonstrate how important that dialogue has always been for Duncan and Marjorie Phillips. I think the Phillips Collection sort of forgot that importance over decades, and we've kind of grasped it and held on to it now as a mainstay of our identity. So we had a big show, Seeing Differently, which was like, Phillips is not cast in amber. We continue to collect, we change, we grow, and to demonstrate that growth of our collection and our program. And then we had a really tremendous, I think it preceded COVID by a year or so, but a very active community advisory committee of artists, of clergy, of people involved with access. I'm not doing a very good job of describing the complexity of all those voices, but we listened to them and they said, get outside your walls. No, push yourselves, really push yourselves. And that brought about a kind of a little spontaneously, a invitational juried exhibition of artists from this region called Inside, Outside, Upside Down. 65 artists. I look because I'm always get my statistics wrong. We bought works from that show. It was exciting. It was riveting. We brought in an external jury as well as staff and a guest curator, Renee Stout, an artist from our community. So it was just really riveting and exciting. I think inflecting our trajectory into the future, which is important. And so these commissions are part of that. a lot of this is really complex, so I thank Nehemiah, I thank Faisal and the cast of thousands, and I'm not saying that in a way to like cast aside all of the work of so many people at the Phillips, but despite COVID, despite being closed down, I still feel like I'm camping in my office, which is weird. We've managed to do these things, and I think they're meaningful. I love walking through the entry ellipse and feeling the embrace of Victor Ekpuk's work. I love the fact that those bridges between the 1897 house and the annex are no longer these drab, meaningless, am I supposed to go here? But instead they are cathedrals of beauty with colors gleaned from our own permanent collection. And Wesley Clark, we're looking forward to what you're going to do at our space at the Ark. So anyway, just 3 final thank yous. None of this happens without funding. So we took a big chunk of our funding from the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, and that's where we invested it in our Centennial commissions. We had assistance from the Sherman Fairchild Foundation and from the Frauke de Looper Trust. And I think it's an important statement back to the city to say this is what we're doing with those funds. We are invested in our community and keenly aware of the importance of our artistic, vibrant, cultural community here. I'm done. Take it away.
Thank you. Welcome everyone who survived the thunderstorm I assume is happening. I've been kind of stuck in the auditorium all day, but we are glad you're here. I wanted to say that, Wesley and I are sitting here, but this was a museum-wide initiative. We had colleagues from every department participate in the selection process. And to further expand on what Dorothy was saying, we invited community members in as well. So this is the fruits of, 8 months of meetings, it felt like. COVID was weird, so time's a little strange, but it was a lot of meetings to get to this point. I think we started with about 38 artists, and it was a very democratic process where we would vote every week, and it's exciting to get to write to Nekisha and invite her to submit a proposal and to invite Victor. And I remember meeting you, and the building was still closed, and Wesley and I met Victor, and I think there's even a slide. We weren't open when this started, and the building was just so quiet and so empty as we began the process and taking the photos so that they could do the proposals. So this is a every once in a while you get something, Dorothy sends you an email and you're like, yes, this is what I want to do. This was one of those projects, I think, for me and Wesley. As a director of community engagement, this is everything that I dreamed that this job could be. So we're just really excited to be able to share with you Victor's work and Nekisha's work and Wesley's work. And so I'm going to pass it to Wesley because I think I've talked enough.
Well, I extend my... Can you hear me? Yes. I look at Dorothy because she always gives me signs that I'm not speaking loud enough. Okay, so I want to make sure you can hear me, and I'm looking at her. Welcome on a rainy day, and thank you again for coming and joining us. And yes, this was a labor of love. And I think Nehemiah and I bonded. We bonded. Most of my work at the Phillips is with living artists, and I think we'll talk at the end. We have a lot of questions, but I was thinking is before I introduce you with your bios that I'm going to read, and they're going to be very brief because I hate reading. Is that expands on all the contemporary initiatives Phillips has had in the past 13 years or so. But I think this was another effort to really engage artists in the community and sort of go one step beyond installations that we've been trying to do in the past years. And something that we can talk at the end is what is the difference between installation and commission? All of you work in a public space, which is a whole other beast than working within the institutional frames. All of you have your studio practice. how these different facets of being part of the art world affect you and reflect on your art practice. So something to think about. But also all of you live in DC, and this is our tribute really to DC community, and also its internal collaboration between our institutional departments, community engagement, and the curatorial, and really joining forces with all the staff who effortlessly put time and enthusiasm in making this happen, and also showing that Phillips, as Dorothy said, is not an old place, but continues to live. And it's been a pleasure to work with you all as a real community. Many of us who work this way, at the end, befriend, and I hope that stays among us.
Vesla, before you do the introductions, I want to set up tonight for you guys because it's going to work a little bit different. You guys are a part of the conversation, and I want you to know that now, because after Vesla introduces Victor and Nekisha and Wesley, they're going to do slideshows, and that's about the only formal part of this. And really, this is a Q&A time, so think about your questions. To my audience members on Zoom, there's a Q&A function in the chat. Please put your questions there, because we want to hear from you, and we want you to have the ability to connect with these artists while we're here. This is a really important project for the Phillips Collection, and I know that even others that couldn't make it tonight, everyone has just been thrilled about what this process has been for the artists, and we want to make sure you have the time to talk with us, ask us questions, and really for the artists to speak about their work.
And I will be really brief, just sketching your bias and keeping it minimal. Okay, we'll start with Victor. So we start with Victor because he was the first project that was actually realized. And then we moved to Nekisha, who was the second project. And then we're going to end with Wesley, who is opening on the 18th of this month of June, Saturday. The open house is from 10
11
to 2. 11 to 2. So if you're around, join us. Yes.
Sorry, before we get started, would the two staff members on either side introduce who you are? So that way
Oh, did we not do that?
You guys
Oh.
have to do that.
Dorothy introduced us, but I'm Wesley Clark. I'm the Director of Contemporary Art Initiatives, and Nehemiah.
I am Nehemiah Dixon III, Director of Community Engagement here at the Phillips Collection.
I've been here for 13 years, Nehemiah.
I've been here for 2.5 years. I started like 3 weeks before COVID hit, so as Director of Community Engagement, that was strange. It was like, I can't engage with anyone now, and I thought Dorothy was going to fire me, but here we are. And so I hope, okay.
Okay, we're cool. All right. Okay, so I continue. I proceed, starting with Victor, for the reasons I just said. So all of you are DC artists. You come from Nigeria, and you've been practicing, and all of you are multidisciplinary artists. That's another thing that I think you share. I like to start with sharing. One thing that differentiates you is using I'm going to pronounce this right, I know I'm not going to say it right. Nsibidi.
Correct.
The pictogram of Nigerian
Southeastern
language.
Nigeria.
And we'll talk about more about that. You've shown around the world. You moved here 30 years ago or something like that, and you've been in DC for a very long time.
Yeah.
Your recent work is mostly public-oriented, with murals and metal sculpture, Hope and Dreams Under Glory, housed in the Boone Elementary School. What else shall I say? Much of your work is in very important collections. You showed also in in Senegal, at Biennale in Dakar, at Cuba, at Havana Biennale, and your work is at the National Museum of African Art, at Somerset House in London, at the New Museum of Contemporary Art, New York, and et cetera, and et cetera. And you will be much better off to talk about your work as we look through the slides. So that's as brief as I'm gonna get. Nekisha, I come to you. I love the interview that I read the other night, and you started with drawing, and that really kind of made me wonder, like, where is the drawing now? We'll get to that at the end. Turned to photography, went to school and finished master's in photography. You went to Cooper Hewitt in New York City, and then to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And here you are, teaching now at the school where you graduated from, Duke Ellington. So a lot of things to say, and a lot of things to reflect on. Also, your work is very, very multidisciplinary and cross-section between drawing, photography, installation, public art, social practice, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see that as you go through your slides. We're so happy to have you here. And also, you've done some amazing public projects, and most recent is MLA Library. We'll see more of your work as we move on. And Wesley, you went to Syracuse. We shared the school. Yes. And then went to George Washington here. You teach occasionally at Corcoran and elsewhere, and also do a lot of public art project. And I also read that you have your own team, Wesley Clark Art, yes, working with other professionals, doing a lot of public work and a lot of great thinking and a lot of socially oriented projects. So we'll hear more about that. You were invited to do the project, one of the most important one for the Lincoln, I'm blanking, look, Lincoln Cottage, and that led to many other projects, yes, and we'll hear more about that. And maybe I should just stop and let you speak about that, and then we can end up with great questions and conversation, which is really the key of this night. Thank you all. Yes, please.
I'm going to concur with your friend over there. I'm getting about every other word when we speak. If you could just, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm going to stop speaking. And we're going to listen to the artist. And
now I can hear you.
Okay. I was trying my best. Okay. I'm turning to Victor. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. And I would like to thank the Phillips Collection for the opportunity to actually participate in, I guess for the first time, doing an important, one other important public art in the city that I live in. I've done things in different places around the world, but this was very exciting when I got the invitation to do this. And I was also really blown away to be the work that welcomes people into the museum. And so I had to dig into history to be able to do that. I had to ask, what is the Phillips Collection? And it was really important for me when I realized that it coincided with 100 years of, 100 years of the Phillips Collection actually coincided with the pandemic that was going on and World War II, and when the war was sort of upside down, and that informed the theme of my work. So in a way to introduce myself, I will start a little bit from the beginning of what inspires my work and how I arrive at the sort of abstraction that I make. So this is Okara cloth from southeastern Nigeria. It's done by a traditional male society that uses symbols to represent concepts. And the patterns you're seeing here are actually writings, and they all have meanings. So it's in a way that's instilling that how they sort of congest ideas into symbols is really what inspires my sense of abstraction. This is a piece I did in 1993 that sort of talks about that, and this is sort of the ritual bowl, and you can see the traditional symbols in it, and perhaps you can see how my work translates. And I've got 10 minutes, so I will be going a little faster with this. So questions will come later. Just sort of showing you a little bits of what I've done with this work and some of the collections that they're in. I also, my former life in Nigeria, so I practiced. I went to school in Nigeria and have a bachelor's degree in fine art and graphic art. When I left school, I worked at there was a national newspaper doing political cartoons. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because sometimes history sort of begins to repeat itself wherever one goes. And I never was maybe the illusion that I've come to the bastion of democracy. So all of the things that I used to experience during the military dictatorship I grew up in, I wouldn't be feeling it anymore, but here we are. Nigerian politicians love to be called honorables. And that's, and this is how I depicted them. Then we also played to pander to the idea of, press freedom, because that's what the West wanted them to do to legitimize them. And they did. And so this is, some of my friends who were in the press with me, some of them had to flee the country, some of them were, while they were waving the flag of press freedom, with the guns to their head and their mouth covered. And I felt a bit of that, like a déjà vu coming back to America, and I couldn't believe it. So the idea of this, my work really comes from two things. Taking on the State of the Union address, where the president comes out and addresses the nation every time. And it always says the State of the Union is strong, but at this point, I'm beginning to doubt how strong it is. So that's what that work is about. So you may come in and it feels bright and joyful, because that's what America feels like to people who are not here yet. But after sometimes, especially in the past 6 or so years, I began to doubt that very much. It comes from this poem by W. Yeats, which the last line, the things that fall apart, the center cannot hold. And that's where that title comes from. And it also turns out that this poem was written about 100 years ago, during the pandemic, the Second World War, and so on. So all of this sort of comes together in this piece. And it was, apart from that title, Things Fall Apart, what also struck me again was, there's a line that says, blood dim, tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And then I was going through that period where so much misinformation was going on. And the experts couldn't even put out a word, because nobody trusts anybody anymore. And here we are, 1 million people dead in a nation that has everything. So the genesis of the work was mainly digital. As much as I'm a studio painter, I also like to engage in the digital process. So the work was really, I was doing it during the pandemic. So I came in, took pictures, and went back and went to my computer and designed all of that in the computer. So I thought I should share that side of it. So I came into this space, I took photographs, I went back and did a montage so you could see, that's Ursula. And so I made, I had to send in different presentations, and we went back and forth, back and forth.
I'm so sorry.
But it was a process. It was important. You're talking about, when you do installations and commissions.
Right.
So for an artist who does commission, you're gonna have to expect those things. So, but eventually we arrived at the color and what needed to be done. Okay, and it turns out good. This is actually the installation process. I had to think about how to change not just my work in this space, but the color of the space. That space, that taupe green, just didn't used to look good. so I had to just rethink everything about how that space was going to look like, what colors would work. And so within the work itself, there are symbols that if you stand there long enough, you can decipher and follow the story. And because that's really the kernel of the work. It's the symbols that are embedded within it. So you see the Capitol, you can see hand, fist. There's a lot of protest going on within that piece. Black Lives Matter is in there. We're talking about guns. We're talking about, the hot topic issues about, gender and, things like that. That is within the piece. So I invite people to just stand back and look at it, spend some time, then you will see how my story of America is unfolding within the piece. Yes, the pandemic, people with somebody in a mask. And I was fortunate that the Penguin Books and the family of Chinua Achebe commissioned me to do covers for one of the first most prolific African writers. And he took that title also from W.B. Yeats, Things Fall Apart, to talk about the collision of Western culture with African culture and so on. So I done pretty much a lot of reissue of the books of Chinua Achebe. So I've done other immersive projects. Next door, not far away from here at the Banaka Hotel, is this piece called You Be Me, I Be You. The original work is at the World Bank Collection. This is a piece I did at Shrine to Knowledge in the Somerset House in London. This was my Meditations on Memory at the Havana Biennale in 2015. We could save your questions for that, we could talk about it later. North Carolina Museum of Art, and then this was ICU at the Smithsonian and Brooks Museum, then worked in collection of World Bank. This is also Museum of African American Art. And note that you could ask me about that later. Museum of African Art. And this story keeps repeating itself in America. And every time we hear things like guns do not kill people, because you can see it written backwards because it is a backward statement. We could talk about that later. Then I've done sculptures. This is in Bahrain at the headquarters of the Arab Bank Corporation. And this is a 20-foot steel sculpture here in DC, Southeast DC, Hopes and Dream on the Glory. And I designed a trophy for the African Art Award, Smithsonian Museum. My current projects, I'm doing a series of work that I call I Am Ancestors Essence, making portraitures that are inspired or having conversations with traditional African art. Looking at my contemporary self within this and as an extension of what I've always been or what we've always been. And for instance, that and still doing digital sculptures. And so I welcome your questions afterwards. Thank you.
Follow Victor on Instagram.
Thank you. So Nekisha, your turn.
Am I on?
Yeah.
All right. So I just realized this while you were showing your work. So in 1993 or 1994, while you were making your political cartoons, I was being invited to the Phillips Collection by a classmate of mine. I was a student at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And this friend of mine invited me to come on a field trip with him to see his mom, who had written some text in a catalog, an exhibit catalog.
Tell us who they are.
It's coming. I'm building. I'm building for that. And so I just wanted to hang out with my best friend. You know, I was like, all right, I'll go to the Phillips Collection, whatever. And we get to the Phillips Collection, and there's an older gentleman standing at the door who's greeting everyone. And I turn to my friend and I'm like, who is that? Who's that man? And it was Jacob Lawrence. And my friend who invited me was Hank Willis Thomas, and his mom, who had written text in the catalog, was Deborah Willis. So I don't think that was my first time visiting the Phillips Collection, but it was definitely the most memorable time because I had learned about Jacob Lawrence in school. I don't think I had ever seen a picture of him. This was before the internet. So at least before the internet as we know it, I think I had a My dad had some old computer with a slow modem in the basement or
It
something.
was bad.
It was bad. It was bad. So yeah. So the migration series was on view, and I had learned about the migration series in school, but it really, coming to the museum and seeing this work on the wall, it really sprung to life for me. And what I also think sprang to life for me was the fact that, was that I could actually live a life as an artist. At that time, I think Jacob Lawrence was probably in his early 90s maybe, or late 80s maybe. Was he maybe in his 80s? I'm not sure. But someone who had this long, prolific life as an artist, and I could see myself in him and see the story of my family played out on the museum walls. So my piece, Air Shaft, was inspired by this panel, which is a part of Jacob Lawrence's migration series. And Jacob Lawrence created this piece as a reflection of what he remembered about his migration story to New York from Philadelphia, from Pennsylvania. And he was so struck by he called them these massive buildings. And by massive building, he meant like something that was like 6 stories tall. So I think, and that's a part of being an artist is kind of being in awe of the world and things just kind of seeming bigger than yourself. And seeing yourself positioned against the world, seeing yourself, recognizing how you're positioned in the world. So I just completely, I'm going to go back to this slide. I was just so struck by this image, which is, these are 3 apartment buildings, 3 tenement buildings in a row. And the way that Lawrence has rendered these windows, just like on the very edge of abstraction, and how he leaves these openings for your imagination. My favorite here is that window in the center with the red shade, and makes me think of like and I have this vision of a woman like putting a red silk scarf over a lampshade. And as someone who spends a lot of time walking their dog in DC, I'm always kind of looking at like the color of light in the windows and imagining the worlds that are behind the windows. And in this case, like in each one of these windows, there is an individual, a family, who is carving out a space for belonging. Also working digitally, I converted, after coming to the Phillips Collection and visiting the bridge, I saw how this painting could actually live in this bridge and transform this bridge into a Harlem air shaft. So I went back to my computer and just used that little handy color picker and Illustrator, and was able to borrow from Jacob Lawrence's actual palette and to translate those window abstractions. And this was a part of my proposal that I presented, where I hadn't quite ironed out exactly what I was going to do with these designs, but this was helpful in kind of, I started to imagine thinking about these lives behind these windows, and thinking about all the mundane things that went on. Imagining these spaces as sacred spaces, And so basically I overlaid a layer of black lines that transform these windows into stained glass windows. So it's really, so the bridge is actually like sort of this, this bridge between the sacred and the secular. Here, there. So I have a background in exhibit production, graphic production. I worked at the Smithsonian for about 10 years, about 12 years ago, a lifetime ago. And, I was sort of watching as I was working there, I was kind of seeing all my friends were having these really huge, art careers in New York and in LA and wherever. And I was like, I felt like, like I was just like working in this graphic shop and working at a museum and didn't quite see, like I felt like I should be doing something else. And then I stopped making art for a while. And then when I started making art again, this is kind of the way that I started making art. I started like making work using these sort of commercial applications that I was using in this graphic shop. So window films and large photo murals, and really playing with scale and seeing how when you make something big, obviously people pay a little more attention. And I really wanted the bridge, like I noticed how, as someone who works in public spaces a lot, I notice how sometimes it takes a lot to get people to stop and pay attention and like not look at their phones and whatever. And so I kind of thought, well, maybe they won't quite pay attention to it, but maybe like something will register. Like there's something about how the way the light passes through the film and changes the entire atmosphere of the space. So even on some subconscious level, people are somehow changed in some way. So Jacob Lawrence's migration series, Reading the Warmth of Other Suns, I started to think a lot about my own family's migration story. A while back, I made a piece called Out of the Blue Black, which was inspired by some belongings that I stumbled upon that belonged to my grandmother. And I also stumbled upon this Buddhist koan, which is, what was your face before your mother was born? And you wrestle with that sentence, that question, for a while. And it leads you to these kind of wild places. And on my way here today, I was listening to David White, who's a poet. And he was talking about the word genius and how the word genius used to refer to places. Like, so you have this phrase, genius loci, which means the spirit of the place. And so it's all about how natural spaces or places in general are in conversation with basically with the world, and that is genius. And that people can possibly, that is actually a very compassionate view to think of all people as being born with genius, and that genius is recognizing genius as where the world meets you, the way everything is met in you. And that's sort of like where it sort of leads me. And this is actually my grandmother. So there was a sort of joke in the family where I felt like I never really looked like anybody. And then I saw this picture of my grandmother and I was like, oh my God, that is my face. And so I had these belongings of hers, and my mother didn't know these existed. You know, I had never seen them before. They're things that she had collected for a lot of her life and early childhood. And so I found in here a 4-leaf clover. And so my mom and I were going through these belongings, and she shared with me the story of how my grandmother migrated to upstate New York. And I had never heard this story before. And the story was that they had a realtor. The realtor had found some places for them in New York, found a home for them. There were 14 kids, and they all had to move to New York and time things just so that they could arrive at night, because they were moving into a white community. And so they really didn't know like how they were going to be received. And so I found this 4-leaf clover in my grandmother's belongings, and imagined that she had picked this 4-leaf clover on the property, and that got me thinking about how this is supposed to be a video. It got me thinking about how they, how did they find the courage to, eventually show their faces to their community, to their new neighbors. And so that's where this sort of out of the blue black came, because, out of the blue, this black family appeared in this white neighborhood. So I started making these 4-leaf clovers by hand. And over time, there's Kanan. Over time, I made about 24,000 of these 4-leaf clovers. And they covered the gallery floor. It's about like a diameter of 13 feet, I think. But I think this is a big part of my work, is kind of having these repetitive gestures that build over time. And they're kind of these devotional gestures at the end of the day that represent, the toil, the sacrifice, the joys, the pain. It's sort of an elegiac expression, where it's sort of like a balancing act between celebration and also grief. This is supposed to be a video too, but this is that. Recently, I'm not sure how I'm doing on time here, but
You're okay.
While in quarantine, around the time that George Floyd was murdered, and just after Breonna Taylor had been murdered, I started taking these walks in a park in my neighborhood, and it wasn't a park, actually, it was a cemetery. And there was a large magnolia tree. And in the summer, magnolia trees actually shed, and their leaves turn this beautiful brown color, and they're very tough. It's like very hard to destroy a magnolia leaf. And so I started thinking about what I could do with these magnolia leaves, and I had this hole punching tool. I started to see these magnolia leaves as they quite obviously kind of matched my skin color. And I saw these leaves as Black women who oftentimes get kind of pushed to the side when conversations of police brutality against Black people comes up. And so I think that my work a lot of times stems from omission. I see that something isn't being talked about or is left out. And I think that my job as an artist is to sometimes, literally and figuratively hold up a light to reveal the things that are not seen. And so these, I had 30 magnolia leaves that were encased in these poplar light boxes.
Okay.
And this is now in the collection at the Phillips. I'll stop there. There's more, but I'll stop.
You're good on time. We're okay.
We're good?
Yeah.
All right. So this is, Wesley, you were just asking about this. This is up till now. It was on view. I think it was installed just before everything went to hell.
2019.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really all a blur.
This was Golden Triangle.
Golden Triangle.
Okay.
Yeah, it's for the Golden Triangle bid on the edge of Golden Triangle and DuPont Circle. It's kind of hard to call this Golden Triangle. Like I had to train myself to say that because I think of it all as DuPont Circle, but it's actually Golden Triangle.
We've been here too long.
Yeah.
Didn't know the name has changed.
Yeah. And this is over the Connecticut Avenue overlook. And I am always just very interested in how, you know, the way that we perceive the built environment right now is not the way it always was. Like there's still there's evidence of the natural world that was the dominant landscape all around us. It's part of our sewage systems and our roadways. And I did a little research and found out there was a creek that used to cut across Connecticut Avenue. So I had this idea, you know, the past and the present are, you know, there's not really a distinction between the two. They're happening all at the same time. So I wanted to create something that would demonstrate that. So someone actually, I sometimes like listen in on people as they're observing my work, and someone said, "Oh, it's a time machine," and that's sort of what this is. Just an image of me building it.
How long was it up?
Jeez, you know, Vessela, all that is just a
Time is
blur. It's such a blur.
These are like semi-permanent installations.
are.
And I think it kind
I
of
think it was
varies
up-
from year to year.
And I think it was up a little longer than it was supposed to because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the last slide. This happened while I was in quarantine as well. Like, if you had told me back in 1994 that I was going to have my work in Times Square and hardly anyone would see it, it'd be bizarre. But this was in Times Square. This is a project with Poster House New York and Four Freedoms. And it's called Messages for the City. And we converted that LED screens in Times Square with messages for frontline workers who were the ones who were out there doing the work that makes the world go around. And so these messages were for them. They were the ones who saw them. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. And now to Wesley.
All right. Mic check. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. All right. Well, hello. Thank you for all coming out tonight. Since my piece is still in progress, I figured I would share with you kind of, just some of the stages, some of the sketches to see what is coming. So my piece is at the ARC in the workshop room. And so immediately I began to think, okay, well, what is this space about? What are we doing here? And thinking about creativity being, the main thing, like it's a place of you're making, you're pondering, you're thinking, all these things. And so really kind of wanting to kind of move from that energy and that vibe. And so this was the initial sketch, whereas these, geometric forms, and they were based off of some work I was just starting to think about, which was really about kind of controlling space and making people move around you and controlling how people move. But this was going to be higher up, so I was thinking, I was like, all right, well, we can kind of make it shift a little bit, because the materiality of the idea was what I really wanted to focus on. And I began to think of it almost as like a cheat sheet for creativity, in the sense that it was going to be made of like wood and metal and rusted here and paper here and layered, all these types of different processes that one could look up and see it if they were trying to think, oh, what could I do? Bang, this sculpture's on the wall and it's made of all these different materials and processes. But in the midst of doing the sketches, and time passes and my own work is changing and shifting, when at some point DMI was like, you don't have to keep it the same. And I was like, great, because this is, my mind's shifted and now I want to do, this. And so it basically, much of the same idea around creativity and, but wanting to have this idea of like just this entity kind of growing through the space and moving through the space, and this mixture of kind of bringing in the natural world. And so you almost have these root-like structures going in and out of the wall. Taking that same geometric forms, kind of shrinking them down and become these like little nodes in a sense within this same structure. And so I really began to kind of enjoy that process. And I'm always one that when I see man-made objects and nature kind of coming together, it's really an interesting thing for me. So like you see homes that are built around like these huge trees, like I love that. And so much of that is kind of in this, is this idea of something else in this space growing through the building, right? Things there's parts of it you can't see. And so then so the lobby kind of came about, and having done this sketch, I was like, okay, this thing is gonna just start growing all through the building. And fortunately, we said this might be a little too much for the lobby, and it was. And so this is just to show you some of the process, kind of working through various ideas, where we get to, and we landed here. And this was great for me because I think of the nodes, almost these geometric nodes, almost like the seedlings in a sense, from which you have this kind of natural element will begin to sprout from it as well. And so it also kind of has this almost like graffiti-esque meteorite situation and floating in space kind of thing for me too, which is a whole other side thing. But really enjoyed this concept, and this would being kind of, and if you think about a lobby area, a lobby is much like, it's a center part that you then move off from, right? You branch off from there. And so this kind of being the seedlings and then branching off into these other spaces, from here, these roots would start to spread through the walls. And that's kind of the concept. So from there, I began to think about the surface treatment and how my work was taking place. And so these are just some of the process shots of actually constructing what's taking place. A lot of foam is being used for the lightweight, to cut back on weight rather. The one thing about me, so I have an art installation company, Artisan Installations.
Follow them on Instagram.
And so I always am thinking about other people installing my work. And so engineering and the ease of installation is the second thought. Once I have an idea, it's like, okay, how's this put on the wall? Who can put this up? How many people will it take? All these things. And so all of this is kind of happening in the midst of the creation process, or kind of fine tuning it. And here we're doing, so these large blocks of foam are getting carved down to what you see here. And actually, so here was the original kind of sketch form that once I got to that point, I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. It's not quite what I was thinking it would be. And so begin to kind of add this on. So this is more the final form, and then this part gets added a little bit later. Well, it's added now, but.
many people you have working with you?
It's just myself and my assistant. So it's just 2 people in the studio working on this. And so this is the stage. Essentially, this is where it's at right now. The foam is being covered with epoxy for protection to make it harder. And yeah, so let's see what's next on here. Ba-doop. Right. So the treatment of it, this piece, Communique, was based off of a Braille-like system. But this is the surface treatment that I'm thinking about. And so my background is actually in painting and some printmaking. But I've really not been painting for like over 10 years. And so now, and it took me, so in grad school, my work went from painting to sculpture, and I've just been in sculptural installations and such since. But it took me a while to be able to say like I was a sculptor. And now now the painting is actually just now starting to kind of come back into play. And so this is essentially my work since moving into sculpture has been kind of about making these forms that are kind of familiar to your eye, weathered, they've lived a life out in the world, and you're wondering why is this here in this gallery space? But that weathering, that processing that you can see all through here, that texture, all of this is kind of me painting and going back into the layers and exposing the layers. So it's a lot of additive and then subtractive and sanding down and just seeing what else can exist, from that. So this piece, More Than a Universe, it's probably one of the first pieces where I began to kind of mix these 2 elements and where I really kind of understood what I was looking to do with the paint and the layering, but also it feeds the same creative carving out of the form. So all of this is wood pieces carved, blocked up and carved out, and and then adding that surface treatment to it.
So were they individual pieces, or you created an installation?
In this case, installation, yeah. So for me, they don't really work. I mean, they're nice individually, but as a whole, as a collection, that's how they're meant to be. They're kept together in that way. Going through, so these 2 works, this one and this one, The Feeling, both of which were part of a series, actually this one as well, were kind of all made toward the end of 2020, and it was kind of almost like a journal entries, but this is where that process of the painting and digging into the layers of the paint began to happen for me. And so here, like I'm burning the wood, I'm dropping, welding over top of it just so that pieces can drop on it and burn, and adding little features here and there, sanding, paint and sand, dig through. This piece was actually featured in the show here at the Phillips, Inside, Outside?
Upside down.
Upside down, right. I always can start to flip those. So yeah, this piece was featured here. And this actually was the one that really began to bring it all together for me as far as the sanding down and showing what was happening underneath. And really exposing the surfaces and thinking about all that together. And mark making at the same time. So I'm really into just this exploration of marks and how things are left. And mind you, most of my material is coming straight from Home Depot. I don't really work with a lot of found objects, but I make things look as if they've been found. So the metal that you see on here, I'm rusting it myself normally. Any of the jagged pieces of metal, I've created that. And all of it to mimic or get that feeling of being out in the world. And because then when I find stuff out in the world, it's like, oh, that's just too pretty. It's not messy enough for me in a sense. Or I just can't really, I like it for what it is, and therefore it's harder to work with sometimes. But in this piece, oddly enough, similarly, Victor was talking about some of it as well, but this was kind of in a reaction to thinking about, like, is it time to arm up? you know? And so it was a conversation between my father and I, and we were just talking about like that vigilance of when, you know, being out in the street and always kind of feeling like you're on the lookout, you're in warrior mode, and you never know when a tiger is around the corner. And so, and there's always another tiger. And so that was us talking, and that made it into the work itself. And I happen to have this tip of a spear kind of thing for years. This is like the one found object that I've literally, you know, for the first time used. But I had it for years in the studio, and finally, I was like, yes. So I love this piece just for that one aspect, really. But and the relationship to my father on it. So here are the drawings that I'm currently working on, and that kind of go hand in hand with the painting techniques that I'm doing as far as the excavation and explorations. And it's really about just challenging myself to go to the edge, to really kind of push and find something new. I'm putting on a whole lot, you know, of material just to erase it away, just to see what's left. Right, so in many cases, these are, they're high energy works taking place, and by energy, I mean like physical. It takes a lot of effort to erase a large sheet of paper over and over, and then turn right back around to then cover it right back up with some more graphite. And so I'm just going back and forth in the process of doing it. And these pieces are also often word-based. Or there's some catalyst for it. So in this case, it's there's the map of the continental U.S., which is one of the motifs that I would kind of often come back to, and do the same process there. Here is one of the most recent ones, and so these will actually be shown at a solo exhibit actually happening the day before, on this June 17th it opens, and June 18th. So it's Wesley Clark weekend, mark your calendars. All right, I expect to see everyone there. Opening Friday night.
Wesley.
Yes.
Tell us where.
So Friday, June 17th is at Pyramid Atlantic in Hyattsville. And so that will feature these works, excuse me, and some lithography works, which is, so I'm in a residency there right now. And then on the 18th, we have the unveiling of the Phillips Centennial piece here. So,
Actually, he's going to rush back to the studio as soon as we're finished.
Oh yeah, there's no sleep from here till then. So
When he showed up today, I said, "Are you finished?"
right? No, not at all, not at all.
It's going to be easy to install.
Yes, it will be easy to install. So that part I'm banking on. But so in this case, for instance, here 4 options, but really 2. I just came back from Tulsa, Oklahoma, doing a proposal for some works there, and that was all. They're in the process now of kind of really just diving back into discovering what really took place within the race massacre, and realizing that something like that was literally hidden for years, and that many people still don't really know about. But more importantly, I just assumed that people in the city knew, and only to find out that, no, like you have cats that have lived there their whole lives and never heard about what happened in 1921. And so, if you don't know, something to look up. But coming back from that, I was, processing all, that whole situation, what had taken place, and essentially a thriving, Black Wall Street was burned to the ground. And so there's words in this piece, and it's reparations, reconciliation, restoration, revenge, right? So those first 3, to me, are really kind of all within the same. So you really only have 2 options, right? And so really, again, these drawings for me and the painting, it's really just about pushing and challenging myself to push to the edge. And that's really where I'm at, looking at line, form, And these are like 5-hour go-go sessions doing these in the studios right now. So yeah, I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Wesley. Pass that clicker back.
Oh yeah, that's that.
So I just made a connection. I remember when we first met, and I was talking to you about your work, and we were talking about the works that you made, these large-scale rooms, and that was like very physical. And I asked you, I said, so, is this easier, doing it in a graphic? What made you transition from this, painting on the wall to the more graphic side?
The work you're referring to is, if I get the clicker back to, just to show what you're talking about. There's a series of a body of work that I call Meditations on Memory or Drawing Memory. The body of work was meant to be ephemeral, it was meant to be wiped off.
Right.
And the idea behind that was that I had a notion, just had a notion one day that memory is what informs our identities. And that our identities are not a fixed condition. It's always being affected by circumstances. And sometimes those circumstances could lead to the wiping away of memory of our identities. But what is left is the residue. There's a video on YouTube where it shows what I did that work at the Hood Museum. And I always leave it up for anybody to wipe it. And so when the process of wiping, you go closer and you see the residue of the mark.
Right.
And that's what I call genetic memory. Part of that reasoning was that, coming from, I was born and raised in Africa, and I came in Nigeria, and I came in and I was kind of started seeing I became really interested in the memory of the African diaspora, and how a lot of things translate to me that are very familiar. I guess for some people who don't know that, because I'm standing in between these two cultures and I can see things back to back. And I started learning, just beginning to investigate that, and I started that body of work. I started it actually, the first one I made was at Roslin, when I still had the art center at the Roslin building. So I did that small installation there, and as I was sitting down there waiting for the crowd to come, because in the process of making it, I began to realize that, okay, I'm becoming a performance artist because people like to watch me draw. So a little kid jumped over, picked up a chalk that was waiting for me to come and start my work, and started drawing on the wall, and the mother was mortified. And I said, no, don't worry, just leave it there. So when I went back, I started from the mark that the child had made. And that was the first time that I wiped it. The subsequent ones were, I put my body through a lot of, this is huge, intense physical work. This at the Havana Biennale, it took me 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was painful. But that also exemplifies what we go through in life. We go through and do all of these things in life. Only one day, just knowing that one day we're going to expire, and nobody loves that.
Right.
So, but it is the fact of life. And that's also, in terms of transitioning to what I'm doing at the Phillips Collection, that was a different work. It's no more about the meditations and memory. As much as I love to draw physically, I also love to explore on what they call the meta universe, digital universe as well. I love that process of being able to push pixels to do what I would normally do. So,
does that change your connection? Because this is so involved and almost meditative. And the reason why I thought about this is because you were talking about, the 5-hour go-go sessions.
Right.
Right.
It almost becomes like an obsessive flow when you're in that state of creating.
it's different. It's different because I'm using a pad and working with a small, a screen that is much smaller, but here I'm physically there. And in the process of making this, like you were talking, I don't think about what is going to come next. It's what is flowing through my head. I'm just trying to get my hands to catch up with what is going on.
It's like free association.
Right. So I work really fast, and it's very physically exhausting at the end of the day.
So is this more like writing?
Yes, it's writing, but Don't ask me what it means.
But you pull meaning out of
But I
it.
do pull meaning out of it. You could walk in there and feel the essence of it. That's what I want people to get out of it. And when I need to place symbols, that's sort of the key to that, I place them. Here you find the slave ship that came with the power of the Abakwa. So here in this piece, let me explain a little bit of this piece. This Meditations on Memory, there's a group of people in Cuba who practice Abakwa. Abakwa comes directly from where I'm from in Nigeria.
That's exactly what
What's
I was
Abakwa?
asking.
Abakwa is similar to what we call the Ekpe Society, Leopard Society in Nigeria. It's a male secret society that inspires my work. The writing systems inspire my work. Right. So for this project, I wanted to investigate that group. I wanted to go and make that connection between what I call my family that has been moved, taken over to Cuba, and they still retain the memory of their people, their religion. When they sing their ritual songs, I hear my language in them. For most of them, they mention Ibibios, which that's my ethnicity in Nigeria, but they've never seen an Ibibio person. So for most of them, that was the first time I was engaging with them. So this is, when this photograph was taken, there was another photograph where the room was packed. There was a celebration going on in this space on the opening of the Biennale.
Okay.
And most of them coming to this room, I did not have to explain anything to them. They just understood what was going on because that is really the core of their culture.
The fact that it was at Wilfredo Lam, who is Chinese, African, and Cuban
Right.
artist, who you also use this kind of pictograms or symbolic languages, and Afro-Cubanism is very interesting. So that's why I was asking the relationship with writing and physical execution of the work, and the place itself that is loaded with history.
And another connection, all three of you go to writing. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to you? I mean, you're all speaking about something that's internal or something that's you've been processing. When I think of writing and art, I think of graffiti, right? And there's a connection between like graffiti and the wall and nature, and you talked about, but it's all very different. Talk about your writing, Nekisha.
I use writing in different ways. For one, I love typography. I just love the shape of letter forms. I think there's just so much potential in just the shape of a letter. The negative space, the positive space, just, I think letter forms are beautiful. Also, I think that, as I said earlier, I think that my work a lot of times comes out of omission, things being left out. Language and text is a way for me to be very specific about where I come from, the things that I've heard my family say around the kitchen table, and a way to center that language and that those conversations, and to just speak very specifically. I think that language allows us to be very specific. Using the names of specific women who were murdered by police, that makes it very real, what has happened. And it's hyper-specific.
I'm sorry, Bessie. Might get a little deep here, y'all. What does it mean to you to be a Black woman expressing the way that you express the art that you make? What does that mean to you? Or what do you hope it means?
I think that, wow, that's a big question. There's a lot I could say there. I think that I started kind of making the work that I'm making because working at the scales that I work, I think that it challenges expectation. There are times when I can recall like just sort of feeling not seen, not heard, not valued. And I think that making these sort of like these sprawling works that I make, it's a way for me to take up space and to not just take up space for myself, but to take up space for others who feel that they don't have a right or have a voice, but that maybe someone could see me doing what I'm doing. Historically, the voice of Black women is often erased. So I do feel a certain urgency to speak more loudly, to be more bold with my work. And so, yeah. And I feel like, and just to go back to what I was talking about earlier about genius, is that, the genius is like what my ancestors have passed down to me. Women in my family who maybe have felt voiceless. I feel like I don't know, where, sometimes I don't know where that really came from, looking at this piece here. And sometimes I just feel like that is like, that I am channeling them. They are coming through me. So to be a Black woman is to be in some sort of like ancestral dialogue with my grandmothers, my aunts, like women that I've never even met before. All of that meets right here in me.
Yeah.
What is it about process that you're attracted to in the sense of the multiple? For instance, I've come to work in a lot of multiple, the installation situations, et cetera. What is it about that idea of this thing growing, that repeated building, multiple for you?
I was going to ask you that question.
Oh, yeah. Well, you stole Victor's question that I had for him. So.
There's something I like you take one of those clovers, and it stands alone. It's just kind of like, it's kind of unremarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you put it with thousands of others that seemingly look a lot like it, but they're not alike. They're very different because they're made by my hands. It's just kind of it's like just this built-in metaphor. I think that, and I've said this before, I think so often we're looking around like we're trying to find like the extraordinary. And really the extraordinary is just the extraordinary and wonder. It's like, it's all around us. But sometimes maybe you have to see it more than once, or you have to see it amplified to really, to have it really strike you.
Right.
I just thought about like how the windows is, you see that as you approach to build them. It's like the most visible one, you see that before you even enter the space. You have your windows there. Mm-hmm. And then of course you see Victor. You got to come to Southeast after the 18th to see Wesley Clark. There are roots in your work as well. Literally, you're creating this root system. Can you talk a little bit more about why the roots? Why the roots at the Ark? Why is that important to you?
So part of it is definitely thinking about the community, like roots in the community, and it's kind of using that metaphorically there. And like where where a building is placed in this situation is very much, built right into a community practically. And thinking about that spirit and energy going in, being a part of the building. Then there's also just simply again, that idea of nature being a healthy element for us, right? So there's that level. Then there's the whole, in the midst of it, thinking through it, it'd be also kind of translated to this organic versus digital, pixelated, what do you call that? Augmented reality kind of situation I began to think about as well, as far as this organic root system, but yet in how we're operating now, like we're all attached to phones and digital devices and such, so we're both organic and digital at the same time in a way.
Right.
But yeah, it's really, but it all comes back to just, kind of being rooted in earth, in nature, and really kind of bringing that energy into buildings more than just these hard, square, flat walls, and it's about bringing that life.
Bringing it back.
Yeah.
And Nekisha, you did that in that final piece that you showed here as well. So there's like all of these like overlapping connections that I'm just now like realizing. And this is the first time we've been together outside of like a few Zoom meetings. So this is just like.
And outside of logistics.
Right, right. It's not me harassing Victor
Which kind of
about
frees
the
us
color
to
choice
really think
palette.
and dive deeper.
I guess what I also notice about the connections that the three of us have in our works is, I was talking about the idea of memory. I see that it's very strong theme running
You took
through
my words out. And narrative,
the
storytelling.
works that we have, and approaching them in different ways. And so when you were talking about your grandmother and how you begin to see bits of hers in you, and how that all, informs your new work, or your past work. But I, in the process of going through my idea of this memory, the current body of work that I was showing, that actually going to be showing in New York, the solo show July 21st, is I am my ancestor's essence, basically looking. But in this sense, I'm using classical African arts and seeing contemporary selves within them. And so this, having those conversations is really what.
That's another element.
Group show?
Yes, there you go.
Can I, give me 1 second, I'll come right back to
And
you.
you age your objects too,
Yes.
intentionally.
Can we get a mic? Shiloah, can you bring a mic down here?
Yeah, it's
Dorothy,
time
I'm going to
to
pick on you
open
for a
it
second.
up.
No? Can I ask you a question? I told you this was going to be weird. I want to know, now that we're here, what does this mean for the Phillips Collection? How did we, why now? I know it's Centennial year, but it could have been any year. Why is this important now to you, to us? I don't know if that question makes sense. What does this mean to you, having this completed and for the Phillips Collection? And I know I'm going to get yelled at later, so.
That's actually a big question, and I realize it sort of hits me emotionally. So I'm about to leave this directorship towards the end of the year, and a lot of our initiatives are interlocked, intersected. To rediscover that narrative that goes back to the 30s and 40s that got lost, that it was about DC artists, it was about African American artists, and I don't want to overplay that, I don't want to rewrite Duncan Phillips and Marjorie Phillips's history and distort it into a narrative that's a fantasy, but that was there. and then got lost. So when I was hired, it was, well, how can you know, what's the possibility for new energy, a new direction? And you know, for me it was there, very organic, talking about roots. But I've been, towards the end of the year, that will be 15 years, which is a long time. And this is, I sit here and I'm stunned because great colleagues who work with such intelligence and the generosity of 3 ferociously talented artists who allow us to do this work. That's a big deal. I just hope we don't stop here. You know, it's just the start. It's just the taste of how a museum can be a powerful force within its communities. Just the start.
Yeah.
So you better
Wesley
keep on.
Wesley and I have plans. I hope you realize that none of you are safe now that the lights have come up. But no, I do want to open questions. It's 8 o'clock. This is sort of a long program, but I want to make sure that we have enough time to hear your thoughts. We have probably 150 people on Zoom who probably have questions for the artists on stage. Wesley, I feel like I dominated this conversation and you're also going, I'm in trouble after this.
No, let's turn to the public. And yes, I see one hand here, Mel, and next to Mel.
Thank you, Shalola.
The first thing is, I want to, you know, beyond the tributes for you guys on the stage, all 5 of you.
We cannot hear you, Mel.
Sorry. Yeah. So the tribute is to all 5 of you on the stage, but you know, I got to pass it back to Dorothy. She mentioned 15 years. And your first public program was about this. You know, so your legacy here is a continuing one, and that will not be forgotten, Dorothy. So I just want you to, we honor you.
Keep on keeping on.
Okay, and
Thank you.
and you know, we've got something coming up in August too, so I'm really honored by that. You know, so it's good. So much of the discussion today that kind of weaved through, I thought, was the issue of freedom. Freedom, and if you can, please kind of respond to why that might be a predicate. I mean, I looked at some of the work, Wesley and Nekisha and Victor, of how that, you know, kind of wellspring of that human thing that you're all discussing. This is the one theme that kind of really reached out for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can say that that is something I think internally that I'm constantly searching for within my artistry, is to continually to free myself from whatever boxes that I've put on myself. And so these drawing sessions are long conversations, in a sense, of me going back and forth and challenging myself out loud half the time, because I'm in there by myself, yelling like whatever it is in the moment that allows me, that almost releases me to move forward that much further. And so that actually is very much that element of freedom is essentially what I'm chasing with each piece I'm trying to find.
Wesley, my response is going to kind of tie into something that you were asking about earlier, about doing commission work. And I remember when I first got out of graduate school, I was trying to be, I love graphic design. And I was like, maybe I need to make some money. Maybe I could be a graphic designer. And what turned me off of it was how much I realized, like, wow, I can't really do what I want to do graphic design. And so speaking of freedom, like I've just always been not always, but it has become important for me to carve out a space for myself where I can express my own voice. And I've been very lucky to have public projects that allow me to do that. And this is very much one of them. I'm currently working on a project in Arlington, Virginia, that is the largest project I've ever done, and it is being built exactly the way that I wanted it to be built.
It's awesome. I got a sneak peek.
And I think I'm incredibly lucky to be able to express this sort of freedom. And I can't, we were talking about like using repetition in the work and labor and all of that. Like I feel like those pieces, those artworks that I make that express that, what is coming through there is all of the energy, all of the struggle, all of the sacrifice that it took for me to be sitting here right now. So yeah, it's something I don't take for granted.
Would you say the writing was on the wall? See what I did there? Renee, I don't want to ignore our lovely Zoom audience. Hello. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Coming from our live stream audience, we have a question for Victor. A patron visiting the Phillips in 2022, after seeing your work, it reminded her of Jean-Michel Basquiat. And she asked whether or not you were influenced or whether or not that played any role in your work.
Thank you for the question. In a way, I would say knowing Basquiat's work, we probably took from the same well of inspiration, which is Africa. That's my answer to that. No, I'm not, to answer directly, I'm not influenced by his work. But I believe that both of us are influenced from the same source.
There's something that needs to be said. And it's being written by many people. Is there anyone? Yes, Shiloh, thank you. You're such a great audience. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
So I came here because I wanted to see Victor. Hi, Victor. But I have just fallen in love with the entire panel. So thank you for being who you are, creating what you do. Two things. The first thing was, I know you spoke to freedom, and I think that there's like a thread between the three of you that screams out to me ancestral healing. You know, when you think about memory and you think about how your ancestors basically speak back through you through the things that, the found objects that you used and were inspired by. And so I think that a lot of times as artists that are children of the diaspora, we are called to that ancestral healing in order for us to be able to eventually find freedom. And so I just want to thank you for the work and the healing that you're doing, whether that is, you know, conscious or subconscious. But my question is specifically to Nekisha. You mentioned that you took some time where you weren't creating anymore. Did you say 10 years? Or did I hear that wrong?
That was a long time ago.
Okay.
It was like, it was maybe for a period of 6 years
Okay.
after I finished graduate school.
Okay, so my question is, during that, what prompted the you not creating anymore, and then what did you do during that time, and then what sparked you getting back into, creating?
Wow, let me go back in time. I think it was.
You have a machine for that.
I was. I think that at the time I'd been caught, like I had to live. I needed a job. And so that job took a lot of my energy and focus. And so I was just really, really busy. And at the office. And one thing I remember my mom always told me, she said, my parents always really encouraged my art making. And one thing that my mom said to me was like, okay, so you're probably going to need to have other jobs to support yourself, but just make sure that whatever you do is somehow tied to your art in some way. Mm-hmm. And so I just had to just stop and take a look at what I was doing every day. I was making these huge like photo murals and like window wraps and things like that. And I just started to think, well, what if I started making work again like this? I mean, I could see every day how museum goers would interact with these graphics that I was printing out. And I just had to switch it up. And I realized like that I was feeling trapped, feeling like I could only draw or I could only do photography. Mm-hmm. I had a very limited, narrow scope of what my art could be. And once I let go of those, once I reached beyond those parameters, a world just kind of opened up.
I'm gonna go, she'll stay right there. I wanna go back to our Zoom audience. Bye, Rose. Bye, Rose's dad. I wanna go back to our Zoom audience. Renee, do we have another question?
We do. This question is for Wesley. Rather than solid colors, your highly textured colors are varied, organic, and very 3D. What kinds of thoughts are you chasing when you create these?
So, the coloring is very much a discovery. So, mind you, most of the time, because there's multiple pieces, or that by the time I'll do a layer in, let's say, spray paint, and then I might come back with latex, and then I'm tagging over top of that, and then I'm spray painting some more. So by the time I get back to a piece, I have no clue what's underneath. And so that peeling back the layers is really kind of discovering just kind of what is going to be there. And so in many ways, it's I don't know what to expect all the time, because sometimes it'll go straight to the bottom layer. And other times it'll just, 2 layers will come off or 1 layer will come off. And so controlling that is kind of me responding to what I'm discovering, really. It's nothing that I plan per se. That's kind of weird because it's a Zoom question and I'm looking at you all as if you asked.
They're right there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Wesley.
I wanted to thank each of you for the way individually you've chosen to express and share what is within in very public ways. And Nekisha, what you said about genius loci, I did a little quick search on the word. And each of you has created, and Wesley, you are creating, a genius loci in places where all of us can participate and share. I've walked the bridge. I've admired the lobby so many times, and I look forward to coming over to the Arc and seeing your piece. So thank you to all of you for that. Wesley, you said something about your 4 options, but really 2 piece that has been just kind of percolating to my mind. And in the context of, I just went to Wolf Trap last Friday and saw my first real go-go show It was Trouble Funk with Big Tony, EU, and the Junkyard Band. This was 3 hours of go-go outdoors, and it was fabulous. And I thought, why have I waited after 38 years to go see my first go-go show in DC? So as you were talking about all that and the process, and this may go for all of you as well, but you said, if I heard you correctly, 4 options: reparations, restoration, reconciliation, and revenge. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
But what are your 2 options?
Well, what are the 2 options in the end? So in my mind, reparations, reconciliation, and restoration all are part of one answer. Revenge is the second. So reparations is what we should go for. Reparations should be the choice, to go for. Yes. All of that. Reparations, restorations, reconciliation should be the option that is chosen. Yeah.
Renee. Oh, never mind.
This
1 second. We'll come back to you, Renee.
Oh, okay. So my question is for everyone. Do you prefer to work in silence, or do you like to listen to music? And if so, what are you listening to right now?
That's a great question.
Oh my God.
Who's taking that?
If y'all don't go, I'm gonna go.
I'll start. I usually, honestly, usually I'm in silence, or I'm listening to other artists, poets. Like I like to listen to other people talk while I'm working. Sometimes music helps. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes I get really into the music. And I think I'm like, music makes me feel very confident. Certain kinds of music, like you just feel like superhuman. It's like no matter what you do, when you're listening, it's like,
What kind of music?
oh man, I mean,
Go ahead and say, push it to you.
Kanan knows I love yacht rock, but yacht rock doesn't really make me feel invincible. It just makes me feel really chill, and it like just brings back a lot of like childhood memories and things like that. But I can feel like everything is going right if I have the right music on. And then as soon as the music gets turned off, I'm like, oh, what did I do? It's like, when you're listening to your favorite hype song when you're getting ready to go out and you got your outfit on and everything, and then like you look at your pictures the next day and you're like, what, I wore that? Like, it's like so usually, sometimes nothing. Other times I'm listening to podcasts or books on tape or.
What are you listening to?
Right now?
Yes.
Lately it's been a lot of lo-fi, just beats for hours at a time. Just kind of hanging out there, yeah.
Thank you.
So well, music for me, I have music in my studio. I like jazz, and lately I've been tuned to contemporary, what I call Afro pop. There's some really nice funny songs and so on. There's upbeat music. It just depends on what I feel in the studio at the time. Or sometimes it's just silent. Sometimes I could walk in and not even remember that I have music because there's so much going on that I want to. And other times I have unconsciously responded to music and I see it beginning to show up on my canvas and I have moved towards that. And I remember I did a particular instance was I was in a residency in a studio in Lagos some years back. And Winston Marsalis was playing on the background in the studio. And I had this wall that I usually just go scribble on while I'm doing something. And so eventually I just started doing things and I all of a sudden I realized that I caught it and I was beginning to respond to the music on the wall as I was playing. And I decided, okay, this is the work. There was a track that was called A Big Fat Hen. So that became a piece. that I call Big Fat Head, in response to what was playing in the background. And I've found that playing music sometimes could form the title of the piece that I'm working on. It affects me that way sometimes nothing. I remember some years ago, there was an artist invitational at the Arkansas Drawing Center. And in that, my piece, a large drawing, was to interpret Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And during that, I wanted to directly channel that. So I had headphones in my ear and started drawing. And that was the title of the work. The video is on YouTube if you guys want to watch it.
You're a ninth guy? I'm a seventh.
So music just does different things. And I have a very eclectic taste in what I listen to. So I can't say in one particular way what it is.
So I'll say for me, if I break it up into working and making. If I'm working, then I'm like processing stuff. I'm sanding, I'm applying epoxy, stuff like that, where I kind of need to not be around to, because it's monotonous. So like I'm listening to audiobooks, podcasts, things of that nature that I can kind of visualize the story in my head. Where when it's creating time, then that's more energy based, and so that's where I'm listening. That's where the go-go sessions often come in, and that's more about the energy because it's just consistent and it doesn't stop. And when that hour and a half session is over, you just choose another one because they play so much, and so there's so much music out there. It's not like. I used to, and I wish I did not get rid of all those tapes that I collected over time. But I'll be honest, I was never a big go-go head when I was younger. It's really in my older years that I've really come to appreciate it way more. I mean, like in college, my boys, we'd come home and I went to a couple then, and that was like my first times, and they were great moments. But in the studio, I've come to realize like that energy that is consistent in it's not just an album length. That it's just something different. But then I'm also listening to whatever is new. Pusha T was on last night and making me feel great and like I'm the dope man. Exactly. I'm making the greatest stuff ever because that type thing.
I think three of us are DC natives. DC native.
Silver Spring. Right,
yeah.
DC
native. That doesn't count.
I know.
There's like memories attached to go-go's. Like listening to go-go on the radio is not going to a go-go. Oh, yeah. It's not the same thing. I just wanted to say that. If you haven't been to a go-go, you should go to a go-go.
It changed. Yeah, once you've been, it changes. Everything. Changes.
But I do hear music when I walk through the bridges. And I remember when we walked outside after like that day, the install day, and we looked and like the sun was setting and it was like, oh my God, you put a cathedral here.
It's funny because actually while I was making the work, I was listening to music. I was listening to spirituals. I was listening to, there was a series, oh man, I can't remember the woman's name. She's a scholar in Negro spirituals. But I was listening to Black church music, like a whole history of it, from from the fields to modern day, and there is a lot of that in the work, because I was doing. I'm not even sure what. I mean, I just kind of went down this rabbit hole. And so for a few months, that was what I was listening to, like on walks.
Preparing to take us to church.
Yeah.
We have time for, I think, one more question from the physical here audience, and then one more question from Renee in the back. I haven't forgotten about you, Zoom family. Okay. Yes, you. Sure. I don't like saying you. I wish I knew all of your names, but, keep coming back.
Hi. My buddy Melvin was talking about freedom. I keep hearing community. because and the interesting thing is the dimensions, because Wesley, I look at you and I see that kind of vertical sense of the roots coming up, and you're kind of planted here. And then Nekisha, I look at you and I see the time axis of community. And then Victor, there's this international thing going on. So I see 3 axes sitting up here, and it's all community. Can you say anything about that?
That's interesting.
Wow, that's a really good question. Thank you.
That's why I'm here. This our strategic goal was to work with these artists. We didn't know it was going to be these artists. We didn't know. I had a timeline, but that's what this entire project is. When you walk into the vestibule, you can feel the community that he's talking about. You can feel the stories that are there. And I remember, because I had no idea that you could kind of read it. And I remember walking into, and I said, oh my God, this is a story. It blew my mind, because that's not what I was expecting. And Wesley, I'm really looking forward to you. We're running out of time. I encourage you to come to the opening on June 18th. We have a fantastic exhibition also at the Art Portraits of Resilience, working with our partners at Task. And we will have a few survivors will be there as well to view the exhibition. So at the same time happening at Wesley's opening.
I guess maybe I would take that in terms of the perspective that I bring to my work in general, especially being somebody who had my artistic experience from elsewhere, and bringing it to coming down, becoming an American citizen and living here. So I'm bringing all of those stories and trying to look at it vis-a-vis my current environment. And sometimes I see similarities, sometimes I see difference. And a large body of my work has been about just investigating the African diaspora, basically, in that experience. In that relation. Doesn't mean that I do not do other projects, but I've done a lot of other portraits. I've done, looking at African art or my contemporary selves, and looking at my condition here in America. It could be politics, it could be about love, it could be whatever it is. I open myself to investigate those things and bring in different aspects of my, as you've seen, I've talked about, the inspiration for my aesthetics is from my culture in Africa. I can use it to interpret contemporary experiences. So that's how I come into it, and I've come into living among the African American community, investigating it, and I go as far as even Suriname to continue to explore this diaspora experience. Remember the first time I landed in Suriname, I thought somebody had woken me up. I would have thought I was back in Africa. That was my first experience there. So I'm really interested in exploring all these different cultures and those intersections.
Cool.
Yeah, and how I'm sitting here as you're talking, and I've recently discovered my own connection to Nigeria.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I'm not sure exactly where.
So I should start speaking Pidgin English to you.
Oh. But how we are it's there's all this community that we bring that's there with us in the studio, and we don't even recognize it. There's community that we build in sometimes making our work. I've had to bring in friends and family to help me realize my projects, and there's something that I'm working on right now where that really is reaching across communities and in this very intentional way, not just to, not just with this idea of, many hands make light work, but also that that it's bringing all these different communities together in this really meaningful way. I mean, I don't think that we could do what we do without community.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I guess I just think of it as, you know, that shared experience and just communicating it, you know, filtering that through our personal lives, right? But also, you know, like I said, there's so many overlaps, you know, but just expressed, you know, in our own unique ways. So it just seems natural, you know, I guess, in the sense that it certainly wasn't planned on our part. So I don't know. That one's a hard one for me to really process it.
Thank you. Before I say goodnight, I just want to say, Dorothy, your legacy lives in these projects, and I know that Wesley and I will do everything to keep it going. And I just wanted to say thank you publicly for this opportunity, because we wouldn't be sitting here on this stage if not for your leadership. So can we end tonight with giving Dorothy a round of applause and the artists a round of applause? And the artists, we're here for the artists, but Dorothy. June 18th, I'll see each and every one of you at the Arc. I have your name. Shaloa checked you off. I will call you. Thank you so much for coming out. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
All right, thank you.